Hello everyone, Carnasa here, and welcome back to another Realism Overhaul tutorial on this channel. And today, we are going to be going over some of the functionalities and added features with Kerbalism in Realism Overhaul. So these are the settings that I am going to be running with for this tutorial. They are just the standard ones that you get with an RO install. We don't need to worry about reliability because RO Kerbalism doesn't actually use that. But we've got our radiation settings, our science settings, and then the settings in here for stress and for our notifications. I usually like turning these off so it doesn't stop your time warp all the time. It can get rather annoying. So with that being said, I'm now going to go over the four main features that Kerbalism actually adds to the game, and they are life support, a science overhaul, it adds stress, and it also adds radiation, and I'm going to go through those one by one. Kerbalism adds 6 new life support resources into the game, and those are split into actual life support resources and waste resources. So we have oxygen, food, and water, which we need to sustain our astronauts on their missions. And then that is going to produce carbon dioxide, it produces wastewater, and it produces waste. In situ resource utilization has recently been added to RO, so until that point, there wasn't actually any use for carbon dioxide, waste, and wastewater, but now that we have ISRU in the game, well, we can actually use those resources. It's something very, very new added in the most recent update. It is still kind of experimental, so I'm not really going to go into that in this tutorial. What I will talk about, though, is the actual life support resources. So we have oxygen, food, and water, and the rule of 3 applies here. So our astronauts can survive 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, and around 3 weeks without food. And we can tell how long our resources are actually going to last with this very, very useful Kerbalism resource menu over here. So you can see I have oxygen set up here. What we can do is we can flick through every resource that we have on our spacecraft, and it will tell me the amount of oxygen that I have in this spacecraft at the moment for the amount of crew that I have. There are 4 Kerbals in here at the moment. That will last us 2 days and 14 hours. And then we can do that for every single one. So food, 2 days, 12 hours, and water, 2 days, 12 hours as well. This menu down here is invaluable for planning out your missions, just the way that it tells you exactly how long things will last. And this is also useful for the other aspects of Kerbalism as well, such as stress and radiation, which we can see down here, and our habitat and environment. It gives us loads of different information. And it also tells us how much electric charge we are going to be using, how much we can store, how much we can consume, and how much we can produce. A very, very useful menu. And when you are designing spacecraft, I would not be surprised if you had this menu up the entire time whilst you are designing it. Anyway, so in order to add life support to a mission, we are going to need a service module. That is the only tank in RO that is capable of holding these supplies for life support. Now, what you can do is you can go in and you can add life support manually using the tank UI like this. But however, there is a much better way of doing this. If we go and we can find this Kerbalism config engine in our engines tab, well, if you whack this onto any part of the spacecraft and then you right click on the service module, it will bring up the actual ratios of food, water, and oxygen that you want to be supplying. Makes it easier to actually figure out how much you are going to need of each. So if I just find this food, water, and oxygen button, we can click that, and then that will fill this tank up with food, water, and oxygen in their correct ratios. And there we go. We can see that the menu, this information screen, has now updated. So our water has gone up to 107 days, food as well, and oxygen should be about the same. A combination of using this config engine and this planner makes it relatively easy to actually plan out life support for your missions. And that is basically the main functionality of life support within Kerbalism. It's relatively simple, it's not too difficult to pick up. I will go into it a bit later on in the video. I will show an example of what happens when we are actually flying a spacecraft and things run out, and the information screens that you can actually use to kind of gauge where you are. But with that, let's actually get on to the science overhaul of Kerbalism. Science is completely overhauled in Kerbalism in the fact that science is no longer done instantly. We actually have to spend some time on our experiments, and we've got a useful button over here next to the planning menu, which is going to tell us all of the experiments that we are going to be able to run. So every single scientific experiment in the game will be listed in here. So if I click on any one, it will tell us on this screen here the situations that we can actually run the experiment. And then it will also tell us how long the experiment is going to take. So for our visual imaging 2, it's going to take us an hour, and then we get up to 2 hours. And then some experiments, if I can find the correct one, some of them do take an incredibly long time. I am looking for where is this is this is showing my sheer ineptitude. There we go, at using the alphabet. There we go. Orbital perturbation experiment. This experiment takes up to 10 years. So some of these experiments do take an incredibly long time, but this is an incredibly useful screen if you want to know if you are going to be able to run said experiment. So we've got some requirements here as well. We need to make sure that we satisfy those requirements in order to actually run every experiment that we are going to want to do. So another thing about science is if we grab a probe core, if I can find one in here quite quickly, there we go, we'll get this procedural probe core. So Kerbalism, you can add science in probe cores, which is going to be very useful. If we go to the part action window and we come all the way down here to configuration, and we can configure experiments, which will bring up this screen here. And then we can just go through and we can add experiments to the actual probe core, which is going to be very useful. Some experiments that you can add in here can only be added into these probes, I believe. And it's not just for unmanned experiments as well. So we've got these on our probe and we can just go through and adding whatever we want. It will tell you what the extra mass and cost is, and it will also tell you the requirements for the experiment in this window as well. Very useful. But no, we don't just have those for unmanned experiments. So if I come and I grab a command module as well, what we can do is we can go down and we can configure crew science. So there are different sciences, that's probably not correct. There is different research that you can do with a crew and a craft as well. So on the Orion capsule, we have space television broadcast, ion sensing altitude control, and a whole load of other ones. Now, this does change depending on the capsule that you are using. So the Orion, being the most advanced, has the most advanced experiments. However, if we go and grab a Mercury capsule, this will also have crew science, but it will be different science from what we can do. So make sure that you check and that you have actually got all of the science available that you want. See, so we've got Earth photography, flight control experiments, and yes, just a whole host of other different scientific experiments, depending on the capsule that you are using. Once again, when I get to highlighting some of these features in an actual flight, we will get up the Kerbalism info menu, and I'll show you a little bit more about what you can do when we are actually in a flight. 3 main factors will affect the stress of astronauts, and that's the living space that our astronauts have, the comfort level that they have, and whether the spacecraft is pressurized. So, living space is basically expanded upon if you add some more habitation to a craft. So there we go, we've brought our living space up to good just by adding these couple of modules here. I have specifically chosen these parts as well because they are also going to increase the comfort of our astronauts. So if we hover over the comfort, we can see comfort is split into an additional 6 factors. Firm ground, exercise, not alone, call home, panorama, and plants. We're not going to be dealing with plants because there is no way to actually increase that within RO Kerbalism. The others, however, we can. So this cupola module, we can see that that has actually added a panorama section, and we can check if we right click on the part in the part picker, we can see that we have our comfort described over here. So it offers a relaxing panoramic view of the void of space, and that will increase our comfort for panorama. If we grab this habitation module, that will increase our comfort for exercise because there is a treadmill located in this part as well. And if we right click on this part in the part picker, we can see that too. So that is going to dramatically increase our stress duration up to 200 days just by adding these comforts. We've almost got everything. The only thing we don't have is firm ground. The only way you can add firm ground is either by landing on a planetary body or using a habitation ring, a centrifuge ring. Unfortunately, in RO RP-1, there aren't any that are configured to be able to do that, so we're going to have to land in order to tick that box. We can actually see what it will do if we are landed on a body. So Kerbalism, we can change the planet with this up here on the top left. So we can now set it, planet or body even, we can set it to the moon, and then we've got our situation. Right now we are in orbit, however we can change that to high orbit, or we can change that to landed, and we can see if we are landed, that has actually ticked the firm ground box and raised our comfort up to 100%, which is as good as we are going to be able to get it. We can see that has increased our duration by another 20 days. Now, the last section that we are going to be getting onto will be pressurization, and that will drastically increase how long our crew can survive in the void of space without going insane. So what we're going to do with this is I'm going to grab this external ECLSS module, and I'm going to just stick it on the side for now. And we have currently got it configured to a nitrogen pressure controller, and we can configure that just by going in here, and we can change it. So there is an O2 one as well. I prefer using nitrogen just because I like using oxygen to actually provide my astronauts with oxygen. So we're going to stick that on there. And what we are going to do is I have got this little tank which is filled up with nitrogen. And if I place this on here, we can see that our duration has now gone up from 222 days to over 3 years just by pressurizing the spacecraft. Like I said, pressurization is vital if you want your astronaut stress to, well, not have a mental breakdown. So if your astronauts get their stress level up to max, they will have a breakdown. Sometimes this can mean nothing and nothing bad can happen. However, other times they can get rid of some of the food on the spacecraft. They can damage some parts on the spacecraft. They can dump any kind of life support. They can dump fuel. So it's highly advisable not to let your astronauts get a little bit ratty and try and keep them as happy as possible. As was the case with food, water, and oxygen, we can also check to see how long our nitrogen supplies are going to be able to run for whilst we are running this just by clicking over and going to the nitrogen section. So we can see this is only going to last for 141 days, so we probably will need more nitrogen than we have at the moment for a long duration mission. However, that is basically stress in a nutshell. Once again, I will kind of get into a little bit more when we send this craft out into the void of space. Radiation is the final feature of Kerbalism that I want to talk about in this tutorial, and I've come to the tracking station to show this. If I hit B, we can bring up a Kerbalism info screen whilst we're in the tracking station. And what we can do is we can click on these, and it will actually show us the radiation belts around Earth. So we have the Van Allen belts here, and it will also show us the magnetosphere of the planet as well. Kind of useful for planning to make sure that you don't leave your space station smack bang in the middle of one of these Van Allen belts. And all of the planets do have these, for planets that do actually have radiation belts and magnetospheres. So if we go over to Jupiter and we can click it, we can see it's extending all the way almost to Saturn, as it does in real life. Jupiter's magnetosphere is quite frankly huge, and there we go, we can see the inner and outer belts for Jupiter as well. They are incredibly deadly, so sending a crewed mission to Jupiter with Kerbalism is very difficult. If you want to go to one of the inner moons, it's basically impossible if you want to do that. There are ways that we can mitigate radiation in Kerbalism though when we are building our spacecraft. So if we right click on the command module, we can come down to resources and we can see that we have a new resource that has been added with Kerbalism, and that is shielding. So shielding will protect us against radiation. If I change this from stress to radiation, we can hover over this and we can see how long our astronauts are going to be able to survive against the background radiation in space. So at the moment, if we are on the surface of the moon, well, we're going to last 1 year and 97 days. Interstellar and interplanetary, we can kind of see how long that's going to be. And if we get hit by a solar storm, we can see that we're only going to survive for an hour. Solar storms are incredibly dangerous. What we can do, though, in order to up these numbers, is increase our shielding on the craft. So shielding is actually shared throughout the entire craft. So in order to get the maximum effect, we are going to have to fill up every single module that has shielding on it. We can't just fill up one and keep our astronauts in that module. No, we have to split it across the entire craft. So there we go. we can now see we've got 20 millimeters of shielding, and that is going to drastically increase the amount of time that we can spend in space before getting absolutely obliterated by radiation. However, I would like to point out, shielding is either made of lead or water, and so is incredibly heavy. Our mass has now jumped up to 176 tons. So if we take off all of the shielding, well, it is going to jump back down to about 15 tons. So it's incredibly heavy. So it is a balance between having enough shielding that your astronauts are going to be able to survive on the missions that you have planned, which is why it is great to check over here and to see how long that it is going to actually last the shielding. So say we go for something like this, and we can see that we are going to be able to survive about 5 years interplanetary, which is going to be more than enough to, say, send a manned mission to Mars, but it is also going to make this 105 tons. But yeah, it is a balance between doing that and actually having your spacecraft light enough to perform these missions. Obviously, we're still not going to last very long in a solar storm, and solar storms do happen fairly frequently. There is a way that we can mitigate that even further though, which I will show you once we're out and about doing some stuff in space. So here we are finally in space with this rather janky looking spacecraft. And what I want to do whilst we're here is just to kind of go over some of the additional things that we can see when we are in space with Kerbalism. So we have this menu up here, which is going to be our main information screen. And we can see we've got it split into separate components. This information screen will let us know all about the vitals of our astronauts. It will tell us about our transmission, whether we can actually connect to anywhere, the amount of science that we have transmitted, and it will also give us a rundown of all of our supplies. And then down here, we have some more important information, such as the CO2 level within the spacecraft. We need scrubbers to actually remove CO2. So there is a scrubber in this spacecraft. I think we have just a regular scrubber and we have a vacuum scrubber in here. That is something that you do need to make sure. You do need to scrub your CO2 in order to prevent your astronauts from getting CO2 poisoning. If they get CO2 poisoning, we can see there is a little, well, if we hover over their heart, we can see a drop down of everything that is affecting them. If any of those reach 100% except for stress, your astronaut will die. As I was saying earlier on, the rules of 3 do apply, so we can last around 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. It's a lot more important to make sure that your oxygen supplies are sufficient rather than your food and water, although those are very important too. We wouldn't want to be sending our astronauts without enough water to have a space bath, so make sure that you do have everything set. We can see as well our CO2 level. If we run out of power, our scrubbers will stop working. That will rise. Once it gets to above 2%, that's when our astronauts will start experiencing CO2 poisoning. And as soon as we are over that 2%, well, it will carry on going until they are dead. Like I said, stress doesn't really matter. Once we get to 100% stress, it will reset it to 50, and something bad may happen or something bad might not happen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and wait and see, and hopefully we will be hit by a solar storm, because there is something else that I want to actually highlight that you can do to mitigate solar storm effects. So I waited a really long time and we weren't being hit by any solar storms, so I went into the settings and I turned up their probability quite dramatically. And now we can see that we have this little red flashing icon here saying that we are exposed to extreme radiation because there is a solar storm in progress. And we can see that we are currently being hit by 79.672 rads per hour. Quite a lethal dose of radiation. What we can do, however, though, is if we turn the spacecraft and we try and get, say, a fuel tank that is full of fuel in between the crew and the sun, that will start mitigating the effects of the solar radiation. There we go. If we turn there, we can see we've got that down to 0.0. Well, it's going up again now, but yeah, try and get a fuel tank with something in it in between the sun and your crew, and you will seriously mitigate the effects of a solar storm. To be honest, this isn't a great example because there isn't really a fuel tank in the way of much, but we can see we've got it down from about 79 to 26, which is a lot better and will mean our astronauts last a lot longer. Solar storms, they can be overcome, but you do have to just be aware and you do have to move your spacecraft around so that you can mitigate that. So the other functions that we have from this information screen, we've got data, which is going to store all of the experiments that we have run before they are transmitted back to the KSC. We've got auto. This is very useful. We can run all of our scientific experiments from here just by clicking on any of these. So we can do stuff like this. And it also allows us to turn on our scrubbers. It allows us to extend solar panels. It allows us to turn on fuel cells. Whatever we have on the spacecraft that can run a process, we can actually run it from this screen, which makes it very easy, especially if you've got experiments in hard to locate locations on your spacecraft. Well, we can just bring up the automatic screen and then we can just click buttons over here and it will run whatever we want to run, which is absolutely fantastic. So we've got the log, which will just give us any logs that we that we may want, and then we've got the configuration, and we can turn off messages that we get for this craft. If we hover over this screen and we right click it, it will bring us back, and I don't have any other craft at the moment, but if I had loads of craft in orbit wherever, it would list every single craft that we have, and then we can just click on that like we click on this, and it will bring up this information for that craft. Kerbalism constantly runs craft in the background, so it's always useful to be able to check up on your craft just by using the Kerbalism screen. And my game seemed to want to crash for a second then, but yes, it is very useful. You can also do that from the Space Center. You can grab all of this information up from the Space Center as well, and you can check it from the comfort of Cape Canaveral if you so desire. But that is basically the basic rundown of Kerbalism. I'm not sure if there's really anything that I have missed in this tutorial. If there is anything that anyone else wants to know, leave a comment asking me about it, and I do try and answer them, and I will try and answer your questions about Kerbalism in RO. But yes, that is going to be the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope that it may have taught you something about the ins and outs of Kerbalism in Realism Overhaul. It is an absolutely fantastic mod. It is a mod that I just cannot live without anymore. Kerbalism really completely changes the game for the better, and it's great. It's a great mod. But thank you for watching this video. I have been Carnasa, and I will see you later.